All right, so continuing with ethics in an international context, we have the United Nations Global Contract, which is basically there are 13 principles in this global compact. For example, the first principle is within the human rights. Business should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights within their sphere of influence. For example, we have another principle that says make sure they are not complicit in human rights abuses. And we have labor standard that says businesses should uphold the freedom of association and the effective recognition of the rights to collective bargaining. We have another principle that says the effective abolition of child labor. Principle 6, the elimination of discrimination respect to employment and occupation. We have principles that are related to the environment. For example, businesses should support a precautionary approach to environmental challenges. And businesses should undertake initiatives to promote greater environment responsibility, etc. So all these principles within the UN Global Compact are basically principles that are going to be for an organization to follow as rules of conduct or codes of conduct for an organization to follow. What we have next is the employee selection. Okay, so how do companies select their employees, or how do companies hire their employees is also very important. We have something called values-based management, which says the organization's values guide employees in the way they do their jobs. Okay, so when it comes to the management, they have a set of values. Each company could be different from another based on the field, based on the culture, based on the country they conduct their work in, etc. But they have a set of values that they guide their employees through values in order to do their daily tasks. For example, a manager can value initiative, for example, or they can value honesty, or they can value commitment, etc. Or these are values that let's say there are a set of these values, and each manager has its own, and they guide their employees through these set of values to do their daily tasks. We have something called codes of ethics, or let's say codes of conduct, and this is about basically decisions and rules. The code of ethics is basically a formal statement of an organization's primary values and the ethical rules it expects its employees to follow. So what do we have? Each organization has its own code of ethics, and they can be different from each other again, which is basically a formal statement from the organization that shows, or let's say tells its employees what to follow, what to do, and not what to do. Okay. For example, we have a set of code of conducts here. This is for a company. Okay. For example, it is divided based on clusters. The first cluster is be a dependable organizational citizen. Okay. The first code of conduct is comply with safety, health, and security regulations, which means this organization has already provided regulations for security, health, and safety separately for these employees, and they must follow. Second, demonstrate courtesy, respect, honesty, and fairness. So these are the things that this organization values, and its employees should also value this and practice these values within their daily tasks. Third is, for example, things that are prohibited, like illegal drugs, alcohol at work, for example. Okay. For example, we have another one. Do not use abusive language. Dress in a business attire. Firearms at work are prohibited. So these are rules and regulations, or let's say codes of conduct each person at an organization should follow. We have the second cluster of these codes of ethics, which is do not do anything unlawful or improper that will harm the organization. So the first cluster was you being an employee that is responsible and dependable. Okay. The second cluster is that no employee should do anything lawful or do something that will harm the organization. For example, they have to conduct business in compliance with all the laws and regulations. And for example, briberies are prohibited. avoid outside activities that impair duties, maintain confidentiality of records, etc. So you can read all these codes of ethics and see that these are like literal guidelines for employees on how to behave in a way that will not harm, okay, or that will not do anything that is unlawful or illegal. The second cluster, you have to be good to customers. So the first one was about yourself as an employee. The second one was about your behavior that will affect the company. The third cluster is how your behavior will affect the customers. For example, we have one, convey true claims in product advertisement. So companies should not lie about their products in advertisements. Okay. For example, if you can give me any examples during our online session about a product that is not saying correct information or that's mislabeled. Okay, give me example for products that are claiming something on the product's package, but it's not correct. Okay, so this is something by the codes of ethics of this organization. It is prohibited. Perform assigned duties in the best of your ability. Provide products and services of the highest quality. Okay, so for tomorrow's class, I want you to be able to answer all the questions that I have provided in this video because I will be asking you these questions one by one. Okay, so if in the future you are as HR officers, you will be working at a company, how are you going to be developing these codes of ethics? Because this is part of the HR job. Of course, the HR will be following the top management's rules and regulations on how to develop these codes of ethics. Okay, so organizational leaders should model appropriate behavior and reward those who act ethically. Okay, first, you write down these codes of ethics as HR, and then how do you promote these codes of ethics among the employees? And how do you encourage your employees to follow the codes of ethics that you have provided? The first point is organizational leaders should model appropriate behavior. They should reward them. Those who act ethically should be rewarded. Managers should reaffirm the importance of the ethics code and discipline those who break it. Okay, it's really important that the management level talks about the importance of these codes of ethics, talks about how important it is to follow and what happens to those who do not follow it. And then we have stakeholders. Remember, we talked about stakeholders in the previous slides. They should be considered as an ethics code is developed or improved. So when you're setting your codes of ethics, you should consider all your stakeholders. For example, when I showed you the ones in the previous slides, they considered the organization, they considered the third parties like stakeholders, and then they considered the customers as stakeholders at the same time. Okay. Another point that can be done by managers is to communicate and reinforce the ethics code regularly. So it's not a one-time thing. They talk about it once and that's it. They have to do it regularly. They have to keep reminding the employees about the importance of these codes of ethics. And the last point, managers should use the 5-step process to guide employees when faced with ethical dilemmas. Remember, we mentioned it, ethical dilemma in the previous slides. So what is the process for addressing the ethical dilemmas at a workplace? Okay. First of all, the first step is, what is the ethical dilemma? You have to define the situation where the dilemma is occurring. Imagine that you're working at a place and your manager is taking briberies from another company to sell confidential information to them. Okay, is this an ethical situation? You have to define it. Who are the effective stakeholders? Who are the affected stakeholders? Okay, so you have to define within the situation who will be affected. Your customers will be affected, your organization will be affected, the managers, the employees will be affected, the other, let's say the competitors will be affected, etc. So which personal or organizational or external factors are important in the decision that you're going to make. Are you going to report your manager or not? If you're going to report the manager, what will happen to you personally, what will happen to the organization as a general, and what are the external factors that should be considered. For example, will the enforcement law be included because it's about breaking codes? What are the possible alternatives if you do not report your manager? And if you decide you're not going to be silent, you're not going to choose either option A or option B, are there any other options? Option C, what are you going to do? What is the alternative? Okay? And then, what is your decision? Which decision you're going to make, which option you're going to choose, and how you will act on it. If you decide to report the manager, how you are going to report the manager. If you do not report him, or if you are going to choose option C, for example, talk to the manager directly by yourself, or how are you going to do this? There's something called leadership at the top. It's really important that when you're doing business and you're doing it ethically, it requires commitment from the, let's say, managers at all the levels, but especially from the top level. Okay, managers at the top level are very, very important to uphold the shared values, which is basically going to set the cultural tone of the company, and they will become role models both in words and actions for the employees. So it's not really only important that managers keep saying to the employees, please follow codes of conduct, but they have to follow it themselves. They have to implement it themselves so that they can be role models for their employees to follow the same rules and regulations. What are the job goals and performance appraisal? I think I already mentioned these previously in the other slides. Under the stress of unrealistic goals, imagine you're a salesperson. The goal that is set to you to sell is very, very high. And if you do not reach this goal, you might be terminated. So what you do, you are going to be using maybe unethical ways in order to raise your selling numbers. Okay, so these, let's say, unrealistic goals will make employees feel like they have no choice but to do whatever that's necessary to meet those goals, even if they are unethical, even if they are going to break the codes of ethics provided by the company. Okay, we have something called ethics training. Okay, let's say there's an organization, they have a codes of conduct. They want to promote it among their employees. What they can do, another step, is to provide ethics trainings. A lot of organizations are actually setting up seminars, workshops, and training programs to encourage their employees to do ethical behaviors. We have something else called independent social audits, which is basically evaluating decisions and management practices in terms of the organization's code of ethics. Okay, so instead of only evaluating the managers, the company, the organization evaluates the decisions and the practices within the management in the organization. Managing ethical lapses and social responsibility. There is one survey that is conducted which reports that among 5,000 employees, 45% of them actually admitted that they fell asleep at work, and 22% said that they have spread a rumor about a coworker. Okay, so we know that it's not illegal to sleep during work, but it's unethical because this time is given to you to be productive, to be efficient, and to conduct your tasks. Okay, so it's considered unethical. Ethical leadership is usually, what does it mean? What means that what managers do has a very strong influence on employees' decisions whether to behave ethically or not. Okay, so we have a lot of employees, when you tell them, for example, you have to do this in the ethical way, they might reply in a way that says, my manager is not doing it that way, so why should I be ethical about it? Okay, so this is one of the issues that occur when managers are not ethical, or when they do not follow the ethics codes. So it's really important that managers follow by not only words but by actions in order to influence their employees' decisions to do things ethically. But what does it mean to be an ethical leader? We talk about ethics in leadership, we say managers should be ethical, but what does it really mean? Okay, it means being a good role model by being ethical and honest. Tell the truth always, do not hide or manipulate information, be willing to admit your failures. So, when you make a mistake, you have to own up to it. Share your personal values by regularly communicating them to your employees and showing them within your actions. Stress out the organization's or team's important shared values. Whatever the values are of that organization, you have to keep talking about them and mention how important it is for them to follow. Use the reward system to hold everyone accountable to the values. So, whoever is following the shared values, whoever is behaving, communicating, and acting ethically according to the codes of ethics, reward them as their leader. We have something called whistleblower. For example, we had a situation where the manager might be selling information to a competitor. Okay, so if you decide to report this manager to the organization, you will become whistleblower. Basically, whistleblower is an individual who raises ethical concerns or issues to others. Okay, you know something is not right and you talk about it. But it's really important that organizations have a set of conduct to protect these employees who decide to speak up and report unethical behaviors. We have social entrepreneur, which is basically an organization or an individual that seeks out opportunities to improve society by using practical, innovative, and sustainable approaches. So it's basically they are looking into the social, into the society, and they want to start a business that will be helping the society in many different ways. We have business promoting positive social change. A lot of organizations are actually able to promote positive social change. For example, we have corporate philanthropy, which can be an effective way for companies to address societal problems. For example, if we have illiteracy, let's say if we are talking about literacy, if there are areas that are outside of the city, like rural areas, hard to reach and etc., a lot of companies can raise awareness about this to provide, for example, educational materials for them. Their employees can go and let's say a volunteer to teach them, etc. So these are efforts by the employees also, which is also a very popular way for the businesses to be involved in promoting social change, as we mentioned during last class. So these are the, let's say, topics and subtopics for today. And if you have any questions, you can ask me during the online class that we are going to have tomorrow. And thank you very much.